Hello and welcome to Tea Time with me, Shaili Chopra. Well, the winter has indeed set in and I certainly am feeling much colder here than I have in the past. It's a very fine morning. The sun is out. It's not too foggy. We have very special guest on the show to give us some perspective on what is happening in the entire real estate space, something that you and I are hugely concerned with, the pricing, the regulator, where are we headed in terms of land acquisition, all of that. Special guest, the CEO of Fire Capital, is on Tea Time.
On the show this week, we have Chaudhry, CEO of Fire Capital Fund.
We talk about 60 million homes required and all of that, but unless the basic raw material, which is land, is sorted out, none of that is going to happen. So what the government is doing is a step in the right direction.
In news, Ian Poulter wins the Australian Masters. Lexi Thompson wins the Dubai Ladies Masters.
Within a 3-foot circle.
And golfing tips with Jesse Gariwal.
The basic chip shot from around the green is one of the most important shots in short game. It's a fairly simple shot.
Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be back on your show.
That's good to have you. Well, let's talk about how your golf has progressed since then. Having a good time on the course?
Yes, it's been not as much as I would have liked to, but it's always good to be back, and a lot of our investors are avid golfers, so it's
integral for you to do that.
It's integral. It's great to give them an update on what's going on, get new people in,
and take them around good golf courses
Yes.
in the country. Well, let's talk about the environment. I seem to have got one constant in this game, which is the state of the world today, and the state of real estate, which is getting hugely impacted due to that. How badly off is that sector?
What works for the real estate sector is the fact that in India, particularly real estate, given the huge demand-supply gap that exists today, particularly in housing, about 25 million homes, and the massive rate at which urbanization is happening, will continue to happen. McKinsey projects about 40 million homes required over the next 15 years. And now, another perspective is you're adding one Chicago in terms of real estate every year going forward in India. And
Wow.
Chicago is a lot of real estate. So that said, in good times and in bad, if you're focusing on offering value, I think the going is good.
But you know what value means to people today is very different from what it meant 2 years ago, and it'll be drastically different from what it'll be another 3 years from now. So how do you define value? And what is the segment that you define value to?
Value, you typically need to work backwards to say, unfortunately, that's not how real estate pricing has happened, and a lot of what we see today in terms of a slowdown in sales is largely driven by the fact that the pricing wasn't always done with the end consumer and the affordability in mind. So to answer your question, value, you need to work backwards to say, how much can people afford to pay as rent? Or if you look at future flows in terms of incomes, how much can people afford to pay for homes?
But in terms of the markets that you're targeting, what are these markets? Today in India, we feel that what was tier 3 is no longer attractive. At one point, CLSA said Asansol is going to be the big market, but it damn never picked up. So, there have been predictions that have been made about various parts of the country that this will be the next boom, but actually it's all come back to metros. So, doesn't that disillusion somebody who is looking at an opportunity in India?
You're right. The rate at which, say, the national capital region is growing, and with the infrastructure that's falling in place, this whole region where we're standing today will probably put the Los Angeles greater development area to shame. But if you stay away from these areas and you look at tier 2, it's not all gloom everywhere. Yes, you mention Asansol, and probably Asansol has not picked up as much as it should have, but there are 40 tier 2 cities, soon to be 68 or 70, with 1 million plus people. And we are operating in cities like Indore, like Nagpur, where, we're seeing great traction. There's a lot of industry-led development that's taking place there, a lot of services-led development, because a lot of IT and IT-enabled services companies are now looking to go to these so-called smaller cities.
Okay, we're going to give a couple of people a pass and then we'll get on to the game. Giving someone a pass, so let's then discuss what is really the environment looking like for real estate. You were telling me about new markets, tier 3, tier 2 cities that everyone's looking at. Has the space not become crowded?
It has, and that's to do with very low entry barriers in this industry. Anybody who has 10 acres of land and has an interest in doing development is entering this sector. So that's the reason why you see such a huge number of people coming in. But if you look at depth, if you look at how many of these have actually delivered 1,000 homes or 10 million square feet of developed space, which is what the minimum benchmark would be in any other market for anybody to be considered a serious real estate developer. That does not exist.
But
so there is a lot of space
large
there.
Developers, I think the concern or the question largely comes from the fact that there are large developers who are listed. They've raised as much money as they could. They're sitting on massive debt. The business is not going anywhere. The stocks are in the doldrums. So my point is, what is the encouragement to anybody to get into this space when things are looking so ugly?
That precisely, Shelley, is the encouragement, because if you look at customer needs and whether they're being fulfilled, there is a huge gap there. And that is the encouragement that new players...
But isn't it hard for new players to convince somebody that what 55 or 200 other players could not do, suddenly you all will do that?
Yeah. So for a new player, essentially what you need to do is give them proof of concept. So what we would typically do is get in the best architects, do the best master planning. And so the concept has to be very well thought through. The planning, the amount of work that goes in could be as long as 9 to 12 months before you launch a project. When you launch a project, like I said, give the customer reason to believe you, and what kind of infrastructure you put in place, your show homes, the pace at which you start construction and continue with it is what the customer is looking for. And the market is becoming much more mature than what it was 4 or 5 years ago.
At least that's the hope. Okay, there are two very interesting subjects that have always come for debate on this subject. One is pricing. Is real estate pricing really out of where it should be today? That's something we'll talk about. And the other piece is whether or not India deserves a regulator to check the mess in real estate. That's coming up ahead.
We talk about 60 million homes required and all of that, but unless the basic raw material, which is land, is sorted out, none of that is going to happen. So what the government is doing is a step in the right direction.
So we were referring to real estate prices because every single person on my show is, at some point either buying a house or has bought a house, has been plagued with the issue of why the house costs so much.
Correct.
What is it with the pricing in India?
If you look at what has driven these prices up, it's essentially the price of land.
Okay, so that's one logic for sure. However, there is always this concern, and the government makes no bones about it, that there's a sense of cartelization. There's a sense of when markets are down, when the mood is down, the sentiment is down, real estate prices should come down, but they just never come down. What has to be the reason for that?
See, the reason for that also is the demand. So when prices start coming down, in more developed markets, when they come down, they just come down all the way. They could be down, 30%.
But that doesn't happen in India.
That never happens in India, because the moment prices come down 10-15%, a lot of people, latent demand, which was kind of sitting on the sidelines, waiting for prices to fall, steps in. And when that demand steps in, prices start going back up.
Okay.
The other side of the story is the fact that investors, Indians like to invest in real estate. It's gold and real estate which kind of take it, are number 1 and 2. So given that, what happens is, there's the genuine demand and there is investor-led demand which steps in to make good the opportunity wherever and whenever one arises.
So the talk about the need for a regulator, overstated at times, or do you think really this sector deserves one now?
Oh, definitely it does. Given the fact that a home or purchase of real estate is perhaps one of the most important decisions most people make in their lives. It is, and considering the fact that there is this huge sense of dissatisfaction, I don't think anybody can refute the logic for a regulator in the real estate space. But having said that, what that regulator would do,
is something
who would that regulator regulate, who all would that regulator regulate, is the real question.
Okay.
Because it's not only the developers who need to be regulated. There are other stakeholders in this entire process of development of real estate, who also needs to step in and do what they ought to be doing within reasonable periods of time and of a reasonable quality. And these players could be state-run agencies who are responsible for urban development, responsible for granting all the licenses.
So defining the regulator is really the issue. Okay, before the rest of them catch up with us, I'm going to do a quick pitch and then we'll head ahead. Some of the things that you raised with respect to a regulator have a lot to do with what's been happening, for example, in terms of land acquisition. I mean, what happened in Bhatta Parsol in UP or what has been happening in the South. Are you in line with what the government's trying to do with the land acquisition?
Definitely, land in India is a very sensitive subject, a very emotional subject. So what we definitely need to do and be focused on is involving the owner of the land in whatever we do. It could be involvement over a longer period of time, or it could be paying fair compensation. But, if we have to solve the larger issue, we talk about 60 million homes required and all of that, but unless the basic raw material, which is land, is sorted out, none of that is going to happen. So what the government is doing is, is a step in the right direction.
But while that is true, and you're saying this in principle, a large number of real estate players on the ground do not end up compensating, for example, farmers or landowners enough. I mean, is there not enough onus on the land buyers, purchasers, real estate players to try and fix this market? Because they're the ones who initially spoilt it by buying it off too cheap, right?
Yes. That happens, but at the same time, there has to be the right benchmarks set, because there is never the right price for land. I think the best model would be a one where you get them to participate. So you buy the land and they participate in the value appreciation over time. So it's a model where you make them a partner in the venture, so that you never get into a situation of the land was bought cheap, the right compensation was not paid, because getting it right is very difficult.
Okay, interesting. We'll head to the green and catch up with you all. So tell us, what is going to be the next big step for Fire Capital?
Fire, we recently got into a home development platform called Astrum Homes, and that is the management team at Fire Capital having taken the next step forward. If you've got a good thing going, like Steve Jobs famously said, just don't rest on it, move forward, build on it, which is what we're trying to do.
Okay.
Astrum Homes is a home development platform focused on housing for the urban middle and upper middle class segments. These would be homes, garden homes, these could be apartments.
So I was just going to come in terms of the expertise. I mean, all of you who sort of set this up were not necessarily the real estate guys, right?
That's
you
right.
were investors. You were looking at opportunities that will eventually give you returns. How do you sort of deal with the whole skill set point of view? At the end of the day, becoming a real estate person is literally going and dirtying your hands, right? Very different from just letting your money be put there.
Yeah, while we were a private equity fund all these years at Fire Capital, my own background was at Feedback Ventures, where I rolled up my shirt sleeves and got my fingernails dirty, helping companies set up projects. The whole team at Fire has that mindset, that skill set, which requires us from the beginning of the value chain to get into design, development, project management until we hand over. So we've been very actively involved across the value chain.
Right.
And this therefore is a logical extension. What we're doing at Astrum Homes is a logical extension of whatever we've been doing, the skill set that we have so assiduously built over the last 6 years.
Are you using what is looking like a downturn to begin this? Is that been some thinking on that?
Like most things in life, you can't get the timing right all the time.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that we were looking for the downturn to get started, but looking at the huge demand-supply mismatch that exists in India, particularly in housing, any time is a good time to start.
Sure.
And therefore, this being the so-called downturn is not going to either help us much or deter us.
Okay, and that's something that you're clear about. Great. I'm going to just take this shot as we finish the game.
Basic chip shot from around the green is one of the most important shots in short game. It's a fairly simple shot, but a lot of people don't practice this enough because they take it for granted that this is going to be close to the hole.
From a golf point of view, what's next for you?
Golf, interestingly, while there isn't much time, over the last 5 years or so that we've been helping, we've been working on building the Fire Capital platform. There hasn't been much time, but interestingly, all our investor shareholders
Are golfers.
are all golfers. So what they want to hear all the time is, tell us what you're doing back in India home, but let's do it on the golf course. So it's always interesting, and they have memberships to the best golf course in and around New York. So it's always fun.
It's always fun. But that said, real estate and golf are pretty close. Is Fire Capital and you looking at something in the real estate golf side, the home building side? Will that have golf courses or no?
Golf courses, yes, because aspirations for the Indian middle class are on the upswing. They want better lifestyles. We're seeing even in tier 3 cities, some cities that we are stepping into, cities like Panipat, people want the best. They don't want to be left behind. So what's happening in a Mumbai or a Delhi is what they aspire to. So I don't think, we will take long before we have a golf-centric development as well.
Good luck with that. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Great. Lovely.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Rewal. I'd like to explain to you some more parts of the short game. The basic chip shot from around the green is one of the most important shots in short game. It's a fairly simple shot, but a lot of people don't practice this enough because they take it for granted that this is going to be close to the hole. We'd like to have at least 70% of the shots coming within a 3-foot circle. A 3-foot circle would be a circle, if we take some tees and draw it around the hole, this is the radius of a 3-foot circle. Your wedge is about 3 feet in length. So what we need to do is to understand that if I put 2 shafts on the ground pointing at the target line, I'd like to see my club head stay within these 2 shafts. So when I'm making a swing, the club head is staying outside my hands till it comes to parallel, and it's similarly staying outside my hands and going down that shaft line at the end of the swing too. What we don't want is the club going inside or going inside on the follow through. So what we're trying to do is, we have a slightly open stance, it's a narrow stance. We're using mostly a shoulder action. The club is staying outside the line, back and forward. The swing is basically with the shoulders. Once you get this right, you'll start holding a few more chips. And that's going to really improve your scores.